You feel deep grief.
Yeah.
And you wonder why.
Yeah.
You ask yourself why. And you do have thoughts, as Pastor David mentioned in his sermon, that was there something else I could have done, or are there more prayers I could have done, or I'm not worthy of that. And then I think through time you begin to realize who's really in charge.
Welcome to the Midweek Motivation Podcast, where we bring practical help for your faith and life. Here's today's episode.
Hey guys, welcome to this week's Midweek Motivation. My name is Jess, and I am here with our guest, Lorin. And I really am excited about this conversation. I appreciate this conversation, I think, is the right words. We're in this series about miracles. And I think that we don't do the topic justice and don't maybe honor God and people if we don't have a full conversation, authentic conversation about the fact that sometimes when we pray for our miracles, the answer to that miracle is no, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I really appreciate this conversation and your willingness to be here, Lorin, because you have that kind of a story. And so I'm just curious thank you for being willing, I guess, to share.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about your miracle story?
Sure. The no part first?
Yeah.
Well, we had two children, and they were stepchildren, but they both passed away at age 35, and they both had cancer. Mm. And we prayed, we prayed and prayed and prayed when Josh passed, and of course that had a different answer and outcome than what we had hoped for. And then when Lindsay got sick, we thought, well, it can't happen twice.
Sure.
But it did.
Yeah.
And so neither prayer was answered, and we just were crushed, and we felt like God had turned his back on us.
Yeah.
Left us on our own.
Sure.
So that was our piece of having the answer, not what we wanted.
Yeah. I would imagine that when you have that kind of experience, I would imagine I've had personal experiences with no's for my miracles, but nothing on that level. So I would imagine that there is a process that you have to work through with God to just move to the other side of that experience, maybe.
Right. Well, you feel deep grief.
Yeah.
And you wonder why.
Yeah.
You ask yourself why. And you do have thoughts, as Pastor David mentioned in his sermon, that was there something else I could have done, or are there more prayers I could have done, or I'm not worthy of that. And then I think through time you begin to realize who's really in charge. Mm. And it's not us.
Yeah.
And you have to recognize that, there must be something better that we can't see, and his thoughts are much higher than our own.
Yeah.
So, but I think for all of us, that's a really hard thing to accept.
I would agree. Yeah.
It's really tough to do that.
If you're listening to this podcast, then you're the kind of person that wants to grow in your faith. And you know what makes people grow in their faith faster than anything else, according to the stats? Volunteering, serving. I want to invite you to join a team, at least take a test drive. That's how we talk about it at Westside, is test drive something. You wouldn't buy a brand new car without test driving it. And same, you might want to test drive a serving opportunity. I want you to head over to westsidecommunitychurch.com/volunteering right now, browse the opportunities, click a box, hit submit, and test drive a serving opportunity. I promise you're going to grow faster than you ever have before.
I'm curious about, practically speaking, because I think that that's the hard part, right? Is the day-to-day work that you do with God in those circumstances. I'm curious what that looked like for you to be able to get to that point where you could kind of embrace that.
Right. Well, it starts, I think, and I think this is normal reaction, but one of the things that we do is we get angry with God. Mm. And that takes a long time to get past, but eventually two things happen. Your anger starts to fade. And the reason that it fades is because God provides you with support when you really need it. And I really love that Beach's quote, why, God, did you forsake me and leave me alone?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And he replies, well, it was when I was carrying you is why there's only one set of footprints, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I love that because that's kind of how it is.
Yeah.
And he lets you know he's still there.
Yeah.
And he still cares. I mean, there's things that he does that are just for you.
Yeah, we've been having conversations about this, and you shared some of that stuff today, and I think that there was a verse that Pastor Gabe talked about in the Bible, where Paul is talking about how he had prayed and asked God to remove the thorn in his flesh, right?
Yes.
Pardon me, and the answer God gave him was he asked 3 times, and 3 times God said no. He said, because my power is perfected in weakness, is what he said. And I did a little bit of diving into that, and that word weakness is really interesting when you do a word search, because I want to make sure that I get this right here, so I'm going to read this off. Weakness in this word search said that it's an alignment or an ailment that has deprived someone of enjoying or accomplishing what they would like to. And I think the reason why that's so interesting to me is because we look at that word weakness, and my perception is different from that. And so when you look at it, like in the context of this type of a situation where God said no to miracles that you've prayed for, like it highlights the fact that God has a purpose behind the no, maybe,
Yeah.
and
that we don't know what they are.
Yeah. But when we replace that idea of an answered prayer with the grace that God offers us, it can potentially be exponentially bigger, right?
Right.
Like an exponentially bigger kind of not a bigger kind of an impact. Maybe that God, I don't know if I'm saying that the right way, but
right.
Yeah. So when you share your stories about what it looked like to see God working in that whole situation, that's what I see in it, is that grace on the other side of the
and
no.
There were many things that happened that were like that showed me that he was still there, he's still in control.
Yeah.
But and that's really what helped me make it through.
Yeah. So what did that look like? Like, you've got some great stories that I would love.
I think I'd like to share one that I call the message.
Okay.
Josh was pretty sick. They had decided that they couldn't keep him in ICU any longer and that he needed to go to hospice. And I was spending a lot of time at the hospital. But before he went to hospice, every day I was there every day. A lot of people would come and see him. His son came, and friends. And so we had a routine, and I'd come and then leave, usually go have dinner somewhere and then come back. And one day my dear friend that I've been friends with for 30-some years came over, and he would spend time with me because I was taking care of him by myself 24/7. And so his name was Bob, and Bob and I went to the hospital, and we spent the afternoon with him, and we talked, and it was just a nice time, watched TV, and then we decided we'd go to Black Bear for dinner. We drove down. It was really, really cold because it was in Central Oregon, and it was really cold there. And so we went into Black Bear, and we sat down, and I don't know how to describe it except a wave kind of went through me or passed through my mind, and I knew that Josh was going to die, and that was going to be the end of that, and my prayer wasn't answered. And so I just broke down, started to cry.
Yeah.
And my friend looked at me like, what's going on? And he really looked at me with concern, and I I was just sobbing, and in a public place. It was kind of embarrassing for me, but I couldn't help it. And I knew the day and where or when it was when he was going to die, which was actually February 28th. And that was my father's birthday. And I looked at Bob and I said, I don't think I can handle it if he dies on my dad's birthday.
Sure. Wow.
And about that time, of course, the waitress was coming. And so that ended that conversation. And I calmed down, and then we had our dinner, and we went back to the hospital, and we spent the evening with Josh. And then about 9:30 or so, which was our usual time, he would get tired. And he says, Dad, I'm getting tired. And I said, okay, I'll see you in the morning. And so we started driving back to Redmond. And it was a really dark night. It was really cold. To get to our house, you had to go through a piece of BLM land, which is a paved road, but there's no markings on it at all, no center line, no sidelines. And as we were going through there, it was completely dark, no moon. And it hit me again, the same feeling that I had at the restaurant. And I just started sobbing, and I was crying so hard that I couldn't even see the road. So I just stopped the car in the middle of the road. And I had just, and my friend was asking me, what's wrong? And he just reached over and kind of patted on my shoulder because he realized. And I said, I know when it's going to happen. It's going to happen on Dad's birthday. And about that moment, my phone buzzed, and it was a text message. And I thought maybe it was my wife. So I said, Bob, look and see who it is. And he looked at it, and he says, well, it says Kimberly Drew. And I said, that's my counselor, because I had just started taking some counseling sessions beforehand because I knew I was going to need it.
Yeah.
And in that text that she sent was a message from God. And it was John 14:27, where he talks about peace. And the best part of that whole verse is where he says, so do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. And it still gives me goosebumps today. The timing was late at night. I happened to ask Kimberly the next time I saw her, and she said that she had stood up to leave the office that night. She was still working that late and realized that she wanted to send me that verse and hadn't done it. And the timing was impeccable.
Wow. See, that's that example of grace that it gives me goosebumps too, that God can orchestrate or work through people in certain circumstances and situations where, like, I just get a sense from you that overwhelming peace was so much bigger maybe in that moment than the stuff that you were dealing with before that.
It made it so I could make it to the end.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow, what an awesome God.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah. And so you've got more stories like that, like enough to where
I'm writing a book.
You're writing a book about it.
From God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
There's a whole nother story where I got the name for that because I didn't have a name for it until last fall.
Yeah.
And I met some people on a cruise ship, and this guy was really wonderful. He was a pastor. He's a musician, and he was his wife and I were sitting talking, and I was telling her about the stories in my book, and she said, "Oh, Winks from God." I go, "That's the name of my book."
Wow.
So that was another one.
Yeah.
It's just, and God will show himself, even though he says no, he'll support you, but you have to be open to it.
Sure.
I think for the first 3 or 4 years, I wasn't really open to it too much.
Yeah.
But as time passed, then I became more and more aware of his grace and him being in my life.
What shifted for you? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's kind of hard to explain.
Yeah.
I think it was just grace.
There you go.
Yeah, I really do think it was that, because it was the peace that you felt that I think it takes a while for you to get past the grief and the lament That's the hardest part.
Sure.
But once you get past that, then you're more open to seeing what God has in store for you.
Awesome. That's just his little cues, his little interactions with you that show that he was with you the whole way.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, I look forward to reading your book.
Well, thank you.
Read some of your stories.
Yeah.
I think that's really exciting.
Many stories in it, and that's what I did. I started out as trying to write chapters, and it turned into a book about little stories. And then that was when I realized, well, they're kind of miracles in a way.
Yeah. Just little interactions from God.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so
just
cool.
saying, I'm still here.
Yeah. Well, so I feel like this might be a redundant question, but like when you walk through all of that, is there something like a big takeaway, or is there something about God that you learned about your situation, about miracles that you learned that that someone else could maybe grab hold of and lean into in that kind of a circumstance?
Wow. That's a hard question.
Yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to footprints in the sand, and that he's always there.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't feel like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like it. I felt alone a lot. And but he would let me know, I'm still here. I'm right here around the corner.
That's awesome.
All I have to, and peace, all I had to do was, that was probably the biggest thing, was from John 14:27, where he's talking about peace. And he says, peace I leave with you, peace I give you. And he wasn't kidding.
Yeah.
And not as the world gives. Then that was the other part of that, because the world offers peace too in other forms.
Yeah.
But it's short-lived.
Yeah.
And the thing that I learned the most, I think, was that all you have to do is ask. But you don't just ask once.
Yeah.
You have to keep asking. And every time you'd feel that bump in the road, so to speak, you would take time out and say, Lord, I need some peace.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing I learned.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate just your honest and open vulnerability about your experiences. I think that I see a multiplication in God's work through it, because I've seen how it encourages people. So thank you very much for being willing to share.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Midweek Motivation. To make sure you don't miss any content in the future, please subscribe, share, and if you enjoyed this, give us a like, and consider popping by a Westside service some weekend. You can find out more at westsidecommunitychurch.com.